Hello friends, today is 1/28/2022 and today is Odin Project Vlog Day 49. Um, today, well actually last couple days, I'm sorry I've been spotty with my uploads. Work's been really crazy lately, so I had to take a step back for a day or two. I was making an attempt to make this video last night, but I was just too bushed and I didn't get through it. So we're going through DOM or DOM manipulation and events. Just for clarity's sake, I'm just going to call it DOM. Let me know in the comments if I'm saying that wrong. This is a brand new concept to me, and I'm not going to lie to you guys. I am not. I'm not speaking from any authority on this topic. I don't. I'm not even sure I completely understand it myself. So I went through all the section here, but then I got down to. We'll go through all this, but I just will let you know ahead of time here. I got down to the exercise, and I did this and got massively stuck. I ended up getting it just now, actually completed it, but I started yesterday, probably partly because I was exhausted too from work. But anyway, I got through this. I got to a point where I feel like I'm confident and comfortable showing you guys. I don't know if it's right or not. But neither here nor there. We're gonna go ahead and go through it, and that's where I stopped. So tomorrow, I'll go over events and finish the rest of the module and see how far I get. So with that said, let's just hop into it here with the conversation first. So it goes through and gives you the intro, of course. One of the most unique and useful abilities of JavaScript is its ability to manipulate the DOM. But what is the DOM and how do we go about changing it? Let's jump right in. I actually read the lesson part twice, especially after my first attempt at the exercise in the center of the module. Having so much trouble with it, I thought maybe I just wasn't understanding correctly. Um, I still don't know if I know it correctly, but I won't read all this word for word, but it goes over it. It's called document object model, and essentially it's your tree-like representation of the contents of the web page. Basically, because I had a hard time wrapping my mind around it, beginning like what is the point of doing this? Why don't you just write CSS instead of writing JavaScript that manipulates your HTML as if it's CSS? But I'm not to the end of the document yet. I'm only down to the event section, but so far I've gathered that this becomes important, and it comes into play when you want to use JavaScript to dynamically change styling on the fly, and you only want to do it at certain points, or you want it to trigger at a certain time versus having a static style sheet that's going to be applied all the time no matter what when you reload the page. There's probably other variations of that, but that's the first thing that comes to the top of my head as far as understanding why you'd want to do something like this. So it starts talking about the going back to the divs and class displays, parent-child relationships. Each have their own branch. And if you notice, I use dark mode here. They just introduced that, which is pretty sweet. It's easier on the eyes, probably easier on video as well to come across on YouTube. But anyway, it talks about targeting nodes with selectors, and here's your different types of selectors you can use. And then it talks about how to set up your this would be how you'd use JavaScript to create a constant container, and then that would be the variable, if you will, that contains the queried selector hashtag container. If you remember hashtag from CSS days, a long time ago at this point it feels like, hashtag is ID. So there'll be a corresponding ID out there in the HTML that's referencing, and it would select that, and your JavaScript part of it would be called container. And then console dir, which we didn't really go about. That's not really a thing right now. Not in this lesson anyway. Not as far as I gotten. And here's selecting a query, a different type of you can do dot, which is if you remember, that's your class. So if I said this wrong, I may say class up here. This is ID. Pound is your ID. Period your class. This is query. This is selecting a class attribute, and then here it's just telling you that you can do another console.dir to select the prior siblings display element. Goes into specifics about querying selectors, element creation, and we'll do some of this today. Document dot create element and then your tag name, and then options if you have. This is optional, it's not required, but that's why it's in brackets if you have options. But tag name's required for that to work, otherwise you'll get an error. Creates a new element and a tag name. Options in this case means you could add some optional parameters to the function. Don't worry about these at this point, because yeah, so far in the text we've not went over that. Then it just gives you an example of creating an element. In this example, we're creating a variable called div, and we're creating an element called div that will be applied to the HTML. Talks about appending elements, removing elements, altering elements. Again, expectations, you guys have already read all this. So talks about adding inline styles. I did have to do some understanding of this because we did some of this in the example, but that's how you do that. There's a section here, and you do need to read all these. There's a section on DOM Enlightenment's CSS style rules for more info on styling. And read this. It just basically talks about how you can use query selector div and use a dot style at the end to create a set of. These look familiar because they're CSS commands or statements, but they're in JavaScript format. Div style.border, background color in camel text for JavaScript would be small b capital C. In CSS land it would be background slash or dash color, but here it's background color as one word. If you put it as two, it will give you an error. Sort of that there. Won't go into that too much. Past that. Yeah, it just shows you right here. Div.style right here. Div.style background color doesn't work because it attempts to subtract color from div.style, because that's what JavaScript, we've been learning so far, is that it's going to treat it as a minus command, not as a as a attribute. So you have to be careful with that sort of stuff. If you put it in brackets like this with quotes, it will work, and it will treat that as kind of like a string, if you will, just like we've been working with so far. You have editing the attributes. Again, there's another article there that goes over the HTML attributes. That's this one here. I did bookmark this. You guys probably should too, only because there's a ton of attributes here, and it's a nice table that tells you the attribute name, the element, and the description of it, which is probably really good to have to reference if you need it. So that's there. And then working with classes. I didn't do any of this, but this is talking about I'm sure at the bottom in the activities, the real exercises, shall we say, that I haven't gotten to yet. I'm sure we'll be working with this, but this is if you're working with a class. If you want to add a class, remove a class, toggle between using and not using a class. They say it's sometimes it can be standard and often cleaner to toggle a CSS style rather than adding or removing inline CSS, which probably is a good thing. I agree with that. Inline CSS can be messy, as we know. Adding text content. Here's a command for adding a text content, and there's the command, the inner HTML, for if you're wanting to tell JavaScript to run a certain piece of code somewhere, you would give it this input with quotes around it, or parentheses, excuse me, or not, yeah, quotes. Sorry, it's been a long day. And it will apply that to the div.innerHTML in this example, And this is actually a little video, I won't play it, but it goes out to basically saying how this can actually be a security vulnerability and you have to be careful. Because if you use that as an input method, an attacker could actually cross-site script you on your site. And since this can take HTML commands, if they know that and that's an input, they can actually steal your credentials or steal their data off of your database. So they always recommend the best thing to do is if you're going to use an inner.html, most of the times they say stay away from it. But if you're going to use it in this context where you're not asking for user input. You're just having JavaScript inform HTML what to do. Don't use it in the aspect of as an input function asking the user for something. And then we get down here, and this is kind of where the exercise started. It says, let's take a minute to review what we've covered and give you a chance to practice this stuff before moving on. Check out this example of creating and appending a DOM elements to a web page. So it shows the HTML file and the JavaScript file. We'll go over this part. And it says, in the JavaScript file, we will get a reference to the container div that already exists in our HTML. Then we create a new div and store it in the variable content. We add a class and some text to the content div and finally append it to the container. They're basically just in English going through what's going on right here. All in all, it's a simple process. After the JavaScript code is run, our DOM tree will look like this. So basically, it went from this little bit here to after the JavaScript ran, your DOM, if you looked at it through the browser at DevTools, you'll see all this. Keep in mind that JavaScript does not alter your HTML, but the DOM. Your HTML file will look the same, but the JavaScript changes what the browser renders. So, important note, it talks about how to add your HTML or how to add your JavaScript in. I'm going to use a defer method here. There's a whole article in here that talks about the difference between defer and async and when you'd use each. That is what this is. Basically, it's a pretty good article. It's pretty long. I recommend you read it. But basically, to summarize, async and defer both instruct the browser to download the scripts in a separate thread, while the rest of the page is downloaded. So the page loading is not blocked during fetch process. Scripts with an async attribute in them will execute as soon as the download is complete. This blocks the page. It does not guarantee any specific execution order. Scripts with a defer attribute will load in the order they are in and will only execute once everything is finished loading. Your scripts will be run immediately, and if your scripts should be running immediately and they don't have any dependencies, then use async. So as a rule of thumb for me personally, I'm probably always going to use defer. Async is very, it seems more restrictive, and you can't have any dependencies, which that basically means you can't have anything in your JavaScript code that depends on something in HTML already being there, because if it's not there, it'll break and give you an error and it won't run. So essentially, defer will load all the HTML, then come back and load the JavaScript in the order that it sees it. So like, for example, back here, if you had 3 script files, 1, 2, 3 below it, and they all say defer, they'll fire off in the order that they're seen from top to bottom. So js.file, js-file, whatever, script.js, and etc., and it will only fire those in that order and after the HTML has already been ran, so that there's no issues with dependencies. So here's the exercise. It says copy the example above into the files on your own computer. To make this work, you'll need to supply the rest of the HTML skeleton and either link your JavaScript file or put the JavaScript into a separate tag on the page. Make sure everything is in working order before you move on. Add the following elements to the container using only JavaScript and the DOM methods shown above. So, with that said, let me blow this up because I forgot. I think I've seen that. Okay, so so I created the boilerplate file here and just added in what they had as an h1, the title of your web page, and a div ID of container. And that's it. Keep it simple. Everything else is done through the JavaScript. So if we go over here, at the very top, they give you this right here. This is the same thing as this right here. Or I'm sorry, not that. This. So that's already in there, and basically they want you to add stuff. So and to get the script file to run, actually I had to create all this. So sorry I jumped over that, but so you create your index.html file, put it in a its own folder. I put it in the Foundations Jest not GitHub folder I had already created from before, and then I created a script.js file, and those are both inside that folder. So the only thing you have to do besides add this body in here is you need to go to your script tag and put this in the head, because this isn't there. So if you see, I have script source script.js, which is the name of the file, defer, like I said, because I want it to run after my HTML is loaded, and parsed, and then end script tag. And this is in the head so that it won't run inside of the body, which this is the best practice method. And they go over that in the text. I kind of skipped over some of that, but so here's one of the first requirements. So you have a p element here. P is for the para. I call it para. So constant variable called para takes document.create element p. Color is red, and text content, hey, I'm red. Sorry about that. Okay. So container append child para. So what this does, I think, is it takes para, which is what I defined up here, the constant variable, append child to container. So it's going to append this to the container up here, to the document query selector container that was already there before. And then you go down here. Same thing with h3. You're going to have a constant created called h3, which is what I created anyway. Document create elements. So we're creating another element called h3, and that's coming from the h3 tag in the well, sorry, we're creating. It's not already there. If I said that for p, I'm wrong. I'm sorry. It's not. We're creating the element here. It's not already in the HTML. So we're creating a p for paragraph. Creating h3 for h3 element, and then we're gonna, the text says to color it blue, so that code is h3 dot style dot color will give you and you put the blue in the string, and that gives you that, and the h3 text content equals I'm a blue h3, and then we're going to append child h3 which we just made, append it to container, so which is again up here. Because none of this extra stuff exists yet, and so that's basically all we have to do. All we have to append to is the container at this point, which is this right here, the first div ID container. So we go through here, and then same type of deal with div. Except this is different this time. When we create the div, we're going to create it as a style background color pink and a border black, which is what is said in the requirements right here. Sorry, I kind of was skipping over this. There's your P, there's your 8.3, and here's your div requirement. Black border and pink background color. And then there's that. So those are how you get those definitions. Div2.styles, you do your .styles to get that. And then the content, this is different. So this one says container, this one says content, because I want to append this child of div2 to the content, which, if you remember, content is my where to go? It's hard to see this once it's all blown up. Content. So right here. So on this first div, content. I want to append to that. I don't want to append to the container at this point because in the text it says that hint for this one, creating an element with create element, you append the h1 to it before adding it to the container. So that's why I did that. Oops. There we go. So anyway, I hope that makes sense. And I don't even know if this is right. This does work out. I'll run it in the browser here for you guys to show you here in a moment. So then we come down to h1, which now this is, we're going to do the same thing. I'm in a div, text content, h1 text content, create the variable, creates the element h1, text content, I'm in a div. And we are going to tell JavaScript that we want to append this child to div2. So this is going to be a child underneath, underneath this right here, div2 up here. Excuse me. So that adds that there as a child, and we have the same requirement for a paragraph that says me too. So there's me too, text content me too, keep it simple, and apply that to, as a child to div2. So again, this won't show up in the, it won't be rendered in the index until you run it through the browser. So when you come over here, when you run it, then you can see it in the inspector. So here's the title, here's the ID container, here's the class content that we made, and then this is all stuff that we made. So here's glorious text content as a child of content div, and here's that second div we made, background color pink. So here's that inline CSS we made, just following the example and the instructions on the exercise. And we have the h1, I'm a div2, and the p, I'm a me too paragraph, an h1 tag, all inside of the div. You can see that here because it's pink. I don't know where the black border is, to be honest, but I couldn't get that to come up. And then underneath that follows up with, outside of that div is the hey I'm red paragraph tag, and the h3 I'm a blue h3, because in the requirements it said to not put those inside of that div. So these were attached to the, which they are essentially, these are attached to the overall. If we collapse this, you can see it better. Sorry, I have it blown up so you can see it, so I have to do a lot of scrolling, but the div container, there you go. So the container has the red and blue. Again, check me in the comments if I've done this wrong, but this is how I did it, and it seemed to work, and it satisfied all the requirements in here. So as you can see, a lot was done for just a short little thing. I looked at this originally and I was like, yeah, that'll take about 5 minutes, and no. And like I said, I'm not sure I don't feel comfortable with it. I'm not sure I completely understand it. So I'll work slower through this tomorrow. The rest of it going from events down, and we'll do another video with what we learned there. But so we're already at 23 minutes. So that's all for today. Hope you guys enjoyed the journey and had a little bit of fun along the way. Please let me know in the comments if you think that I'm way off, or if you did something different, or just how your understanding is of the DOM, and playing with JavaScript, manipulating that CSS. So with that said, please like, share, and subscribe for more content. And until next time, see ya.